Good evening, members, officers and members of the public, and welcome to this evening's Cabinet meeting, 12th of January. A few housekeeping notes. If the fire alarm is activated, vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Please switch off or turn to silent your mobile phones and do not make or receive calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will subsequently be broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? The following members have asked to speak under Council Rule 20.1. Item 4, Councillor Yates. Item 5, Councillors Stuart Piper, Councillors Everett and Councillors Yates. Item 6 is Councillors Whitehead, Everett and Yates, and item 7 is Councillor Whitehead. Are there any other members that wish to speak?
Item 5, please, Leader.
Councillor Wing. So I'll just update on those. Councillor Wing. Councillor Austin.
4, 5 and 6, please, Leader, but I promise I will be very brief.
4, 5 and 6. Okay. Councillor Garner.
Item 5, please.
Okay. I think that is everybody, Charles. Thank you. So we have no apologies for absence this evening. The Cabinet is in full flurry. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest to declare in the items of business on the agenda this evening? No, Charles. Item 3 is minutes of previous meetings to approve the summary of recommendations and decisions of the Cabinet meeting held on the 15th of December 2022. A copy is attached to the agenda pack. I propose that we approve the minutes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bob Bayford. Do members agree? Agree. This is agreed, Charles. So item 4, the first one of the Councillor Saunders show this evening is council tax base calculations. To introduce Councillor David Saunders.
Thank you, Leader. So agenda item 4 is council tax base, as you quite rightly say. This report presents for approval to Council the council tax base for 2023-24, which is increased by 1.74% on the previous financial year. The report also recommends maintaining the existing schemes for local council tax support and premiums on long-term empty properties for next year. Subject to the passing of the relevant legislation, we are also recommending that from April 2024, the Council introduces a 100% premium on second homes. Whilst we value the benefit second home owners bring to our local economy, it is important the Council can raise appropriate sources of income from our visitors, whilst simultaneously also helping to prioritise housing for our own local residents. Leader, I move the recommendations within the report.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. To speak under 20.1, first I have Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. Given the state of this council's finances, it is encouraging to see this council introduce a new council tax premium on second homes, with second homes being defined as unoccupied but furnished. This could be introduced in April 2024, and this seems like a prudent decision to take given the popular tourist destination we represent, and will allow us to do more in the future to support our residents. It's also encouraging, it is also to be welcomed that the long-term empty council tax charges to be kept, which is something Labour introduced when it first became available when we were in control. This is a sensible decision to encourage landlords with long-term empty properties to use their properties or to be charged a premium on their tax bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I didn't detect a question there, but if you'd like to just
No, I'd just like to
compliments.
thank Councillor Yates for his comments. We work very well together as shadow and portfolio holder, and I'm not embarrassed by collecting good ideas from the opposition and putting them into practice.
On that note, I shall call upon Councillor Austin to speak under 20.1. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Leader. I would endorse what Councillor Yates said, and I wanted to ask a question. Are we able to charge more than the 300% rate that we're proposing, and are we able to escalate any of these charges more quickly, or is that a statutory requirement that we stick within those figures? Thank you.
I'm told that at the present time we've gone to the maximum that we can, and obviously we're waiting for legislation to go through, which we believe will give us the option to adjust accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no more speakers under 20.1, so the item has been moved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bob Bayford. Do members agree? Thank you, members. So item 5 is fees and charges. Also to introduce is Councillor David Saunders.
Thank you, Leader. This report sets out the proposed fees and charges for 23-24, with the detailed fees and charges being provided within Annex 1 of the report. Due to the high inflation environment that we are currently operating in, the Council has seen a substantial increase in its own running costs and the cost of the services that it provides for our various residents. The Council's services are funded from a broad range of income streams, with fees and charges being just one means of financing. However, other sources of income have reduced or been restricted in recent years, such as income from council tax and government grants. Therefore, given these income restrictions and the need to balance the budget, locally generated sources of income, such as fees and charges, are even more important than ever. It is therefore important that the council organises itself in ways that maximise that income, whilst balancing this with managing the impact on our residents and our service users. As such, our strategy has been to apply a broad 10% increase to fees and charges where possible, which is expected to generate additional income of £610,000 for next year's budget. As well as consideration by Cabinet and officers, the proposed schedule of fees and charges was carefully reviewed by the cross-party Cabinet Advisory Group at its meetings on the 6th of October and the 27th of October last year. A number of recommendations have been made by the CAG for Cabinet's consideration, and where possible, these have been reflected in the proposed fees and charges before you this evening. Leader, I move the recommendations within the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saunders. I have down here to speak under 20.1 Councillor Stuart Piper, but I don't believe he's here. So I will move on to the next speaker, which is Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Leader. I'll let Councillor Yates set out the Labour Group's position on this, but there's a technical point that I wanted to make, and I have had an exchange with Mr Blundell this afternoon about this, and he was very helpful in explaining it to me. But I do have concerns about it. When we look at the off-street parking revenue to be raised in the schedule of fees and charges, it appears that in every case the amount to be raised in the next financial year is the same as was due to be raised in the current financial year. Until we get to Mill Lane, where it's reported that the expectation for this year, I think, was 100,000, and the expectation for next year is 195,000. And yet, aligning that with the report, I think that's the total increase expected on off-street parking in the next financial year. Now, that struck me as being a bit strange and clearly not correct, unless something's going on in the Mill Lane car park or around the Mill Lane car park that I don't know about it. And I did surmise that potentially the council was underperforming in terms of its parking revenue this year, and therefore wasn't anticipating as much extra revenue from a 10% increase as perhaps we might like. And I understand that's the case. But it doesn't seem entirely satisfactory to me that the figures are presented in this way with these sums of money for the car park. There perhaps ought to be some explanation of this, and clearly the Mill Lane thing isn't right and reflects something that's gone on in the past. And it just seems to me that if we're going to make a 10% increase in parking, we do need a proper understanding of what the current situation is and what the drivers behind that are. Because if we're falling short in terms of our parking revenue, I'd like to know whether that's because our parking charges are already too high. And I do understand that parking revenue is unpredictable. It's unpredictable based on the weather, since we're a tourist destination, and it's also unpredictable based on the state of the economy and people's ability to go out and spend money. So we're never going to get to a position where we can accurately predict what the parking revenue is going to be at any given car park. But I think it would have been helpful if we could have had more accurate information in this report, and so that the council can make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Saunders, do you have a response?
I'd like to thank Rick for studying those areas of the spreadsheet more thoroughly than myself. I confess that I've been concentrating on the parking strategy, which is taking far too long, and hopefully would clear up some of the anomalies that we currently face with regards to our own car parks, etc. Can I refer to Chris behind me to see if he's given an explanation satisfactory on those figures? And certainly I've got a note, and that's something that we need to look at certainly before next week when we go to overview and scrutiny, because no doubt that's going to come up again. So if Chris can come up with an answer, I'd be obliged. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for the question, Councillor Everett. More than happy to provide some supplementary information to go to overview and scrutiny next Tuesday to help the debate and consideration of the committee in order to make further recommendations back to Cabinet. In terms of the numbers, as I kind of explained in our exchange earlier on today, there's been some issues in terms of the coding on the finance system, in terms of where previous income has been allocated to specific budget lines. Mill Lane itself probably isn't that unique in the fact that it's seeing a large increase in actual income. It's just the budgets have not been loaded in the right place previously. In previous years, when we've seen increases in car park income, they've just been loaded in entirety to all our car parks, but we only have individual budget lines for just the Royal Harbour car park in Ramsgate and Mill Lane and Margate, and then one budget line for all the others. We do obviously have accurate information that comes out of our parking system that will tell us the actual information in terms of ticketing and income, and I'm more than happy to collate that and provide that as information, further information in terms of background information to the committee, so that they can see what our expectations are in terms of income. In terms of, as Councillor Saunders rightly said, and yourself, Councillor Everett, it's difficult to predict what the income trends are going to be. There's been lots of factors at play. The pandemic had a significant impact on car parking levels, and we were rightly compensated by government for a number of years for all that loss of income. We're still coming out of that in terms of understanding the impact on customer behaviour, in terms of customers being the users of our car parks. When we've been looking to set the charges for fees and charges for car parks, we're always sort of primarily minded and driven, excuse the pun, by the impact on traffic management, as opposed to generating revenue due to the statutes and the restrictions around that. And we felt that because of the high inflation rate, to maintain the real term effects of those charges, that's why they've been increased, rather than to prop up the revenue budget or generate any further income. But happy to provide the further information that's been requested.
Thank you, Chris Blundell, for that explanation. Hopefully that goes away towards answering the question, but as you say, it can be brought to ONS, which I'm sure it will be raised and debated thoroughly. Also hoping that we build on our success of attracting more visitors to the town, and maybe we can get up there with some sort of income figure of that sort of amount if we continue on our successful rate of attracting visitors to the area. That has been moved by Councillor David Saunders, and I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Jill Bayford. Sorry. Swiftly on, sorry. I was miles away there, wasn't I? Sorry. It was a nice try, wasn't it? Nice try. Sorry, Councillor Yates to speak next, sorry.
It's close. Thank you, Chair. It must be acknowledged that we are in a high inflationary environment. Costs across Thanet are going up. These costs include fuel, electricity and the cost of gas, which have large impacts on how we run this council. We acknowledge that changes must be made to ensure we keep a balanced budget. As an example of this, the Labour Group welcomed the news that fees are going up for large filming companies. This was an area that Labour highlighted at the Fees and Charges Working Group, and we support this. We as a district are still cheaper to film in than large London councils, but the increase to £1,500 a day for large film sets is to be welcomed. The increases to planning support fees for major developments is also welcomed, as these companies can absorb those costs into their larger budgets. One issue that we will argue, though, is parking. Labour made clear at the Fees and Charges Working Group that we wanted additional support for residents when it came to parking. This recommendation, though, was not taken forward. So it should come as no surprise that we repeat our request that the hard-working residents of Thanet do not have to bear a whopping 10% increase in parking charges during a cost of living crisis. The Times newspaper has spotted this too. Just yesterday, on page 7 of the Times, they reported that Thanet, amongst a few other councils, are to increase parking charges by 10%, with the article going on to quote the head of road policy at the AA, who said residents could soon vote with their wheels and decide to avoid town centres and shop online. But it will not only affect our businesses, it will mean that Thanet resident with an annual car park season ticket will need to find another £64 more than last year in order to go about their daily life. Has the cost of maintaining car parks increased suddenly? Royal Harbour car park in Ramsgate is still without lifts. Has the cost for council car park season tickets increased by 10%? We don't think so. The Fees and Charges report states that a full parking review is to be carried out by April 2024, and that changes will come into effect then. Surely it is better to wait for the outcome of the parking review rather than increase costs so dramatically for our residents during a cost of living crisis before that review is complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates, and you and I have had discussions on this previously. Yes, as I said to the previous question, I have been spending a lot of time talking to officers with regards to the parking strategy that's currently underway, and it would be lovely, and I would have loved to have got to a situation where we could come up with a scheme that gave our residents preferential treatment with regards to parking costs, etc. But quite frankly, if the parking strategy comes up with the recommendations, and I believe that it will certainly take a long while, and I guess the whole of 2024 to bring into play. And because what we need in order to do that is we need to get into a situation where we have a digital system that gives residents the opportunity of taking advantage of that digital situation. And we are talking to other authorities, other local authorities, with regards to a situation where perhaps we could take advantage of the experience that they've had over the last 2 years, where in fact they do have a digital system that gives a benefit to the residents. So we are working on it. I take the point, but we need the revenue during the forthcoming year and not in the following year. But let's carry on with the debate and hope that we can move it forward and that the residents can see a situation where we can give preferential treatment to all of the residents, and maybe those key workers that you keep reminding me about have a premium over and above the rest of the residents. Thank you.
Next to speak under 20.1 is Councillor Austin.
Picking up on Councillor Yates's point again, and I'm pleased to hear Councillor Saunders say that he's concerned that the parking review is taking so long, because that's certainly a concern that we have. When you think that Councillor Crittenden's successful motion to proposing a parking review was way back when we were in the Winter Gardens, still socially distanced under COVID rules. It's been a very long time in getting anywhere, and it feels that we're sort of in suspended animation at the moment. I'm not sure why there are certain measures that we couldn't bring in temporarily. And we've talked about key workers here, and I know Councillor Garner wants to pick up on that matter. But also things like coach parking. You know, we've got no coach parking, no formal coach parking in Ramsgate, and all the way along the seafront we have coaches parked every summer. It seems an opportunity for some income and some better facilities for coaches that we could perhaps pick up, even if it was only temporarily. Likewise, I know we've had discussions at the CAG about making better use of the unused areas on Ramsgate Port in the short term for things like camper van parking or storage. We know we've got waiting lists for storage containers, things like that. Those nice areas delineated in lilac that Mike Humber has shown us in previous meetings. I know there are plans for them in the long term, but in the short term, perhaps those are things we could be looking at that wouldn't cut across the parking strategy, but might actually give us a bit more evidence as to what demand is for the future. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Yes, I am as frustrated as everyone else with regards to the speed that things move in local government, but unfortunately that's the way we are. We do have resource issues internally, as I'm sure we're all aware of, but I keep on the case, and as soon as we can get to a situation where we can introduce a sensible arrangement, believe you me, we will do. Obviously, the port and harbour is not part of my portfolio, so I can't make too many suggestions in that direction, but I will talk to the leader for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. I look forward to that little chat. Councillor Wing, next to speak under 20.1.
Thank you. I sort of pick up on a lot of points that have been previously said. I'm really glad to see that the car park strategy will start soon, and hope we will involve stakeholders' input, and that it will also consider the varying nature of our communities that exist within Thanet, where parking pressures differ. And in the coastal strips, of course, Central Harbour, where I am, are absolutely critical and chronic. I've been involved in working with residents really since I was elected, because alongside rubbish, parking and housing are also up there. And actually some of our residents come up with some really good ideas that we're not feeding into that, but they also have concerns. And I also walked my entire ward recently and developed a highway improvement plan. What I found was we have serious issue with parking, where we've got whole roads where there's no pedestrian, there's no pavement. So we have to consider the knock-on. So I think what I'm saying is, you say the primary purpose for setting fees and charges for car parks and on-street parking is to aid traffic management and traffic flow. I can tell you in Central Harbour we are utterly failing in that, with that regard. And if you're a pedestrian, then pedestrian safety and the use of pavements on many roads is not possible. If you've got a disability or you're a parent with a child in a pushchair or mobility scooter, you've also got a problem. So I think what I'd like to know, and it follows on from what Councillor Everett said, is how have we evidenced the impact of increasing charges in previous years on the positive benefit of traffic management and traffic flow, and how did that inform decision making now? What I'd also like is, and do we actually model the positives and the negatives of any changes in fees? And do we actually look at the adverse effect that it may have on number of people visiting businesses, and also the impact on resident parking? So Nelson Crescent's got a resident parking scheme. Today there was 34 empty spaces. That exists all the way round the year, because nobody wants to pay £2.30 an hour to park there. Now, we can say that's okay, they just don't pay £2.30, but the impact on residents is everybody who comes into town tries to cram on the free parking behind. So we have a situation where residents are negatively being affected, and perhaps cars are not visiting businesses in our town centres because it's free at Westwood Cross. So if we're going to make decisions and we're going to state it's going to improve traffic flow and traffic management, I'd like to see more evidence of that happening based around increasing our fees. And I'd also like to see a modelling or look at the other negative or positive effects it's having for residents further back or outside of our parking zones. Thank you. I know it's a long one.
That's quite all right. I can let you know that I certainly have a long list, which I've got headed "What If?" And so that's my what if list that I get from residents on a regular basis. Let's not forget that we are talking about our own off-street car parking as far as the fees and charges are concerned. The on-street car parking is, of course, managed by ourselves on behalf of KCC. And obviously, we all know that the money goes into DCRIM. So that's where we need to look very carefully at what we do with regards to on-street car parking. So we tend to concentrate on our own off-street car parking. I'm sure Chris can assure me that we do modelling based on fees and charges from our own street car parking. I don't personally get involved in that, but no doubt, I'm afraid, I must ask Chris and believe that is the case. But yeah, I mean, I'd really like to get to a situation. It really frustrates me that we have far too much free parking in Thanet. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I don't know what the answer is unless we put a toll bridge at the Watson. But you know, we could spend all night debating the pros and cons of different methods with regards to parking. It's a minefield as far as getting the right solution for our residents, which is my concern. Chris, I don't know if you can assure us that we do the relevant modelling.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. In terms of the modelling, this is something that will actually form part of the strategy. When we're looking at the increase this year, this, as I mentioned in my response to Councillor Everett, this is about maintaining the real-term impact of the parking charges. If you take inflation into account, the parking charges are actually staying the same because of where inflation is in the economy, which allows the impact to stay the same. We're not looking to improve traffic flow through increasing charges this year. We're looking to maintain the status quo, which is in accordance, actually, if you look the last couple of years prior to this, we froze parking charges, partly because inflation was a lot lower, but equally because we knew that there was a lot less people going out and driving and using our car parks or car parking spaces because of the pandemic. So a part of the parking strategy that will be coming forward, members will have access to the details that will be coming out of all that modelling that needs to be done. But at the moment, it's largely around maintaining the existing parking arrangements that we've got in place from a real terms inflationary impact.
Thank you, Chris, for that. And next to speak under 20.1 is Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, a key worker parking permit scheme has been mentioned by a couple of people. And I understand it was discussed and considered at the fees and charges cabinet advisory group and not taken forward, and I'd just like to ask for that decision to be reconsidered. I think this could bring a lot of benefit to some of the people who would most benefit from help in our community, and I just wondered if that could be reconsidered, maybe with a pilot scheme where we could work with a couple of care providers in Thanet and work out how much that would cost, because I'm sure that the benefits to those key workers would certainly outweigh the costs that it might cost us. So I wondered if that could be considered, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we have looked at it. The current scheme requires us to designate zones. Those zones are associated with some form of prohibition, double yellow lines, pay and display meters, etc. The main complaint that I get from residents that live in the zones and pay their annual fee is that their parking space is not guaranteed, and they get very frustrated when they drive home and find that they are actually not able to park within the zone that their permit covers them. They have to go and find somewhere else to park. So there are difficulties with introducing that arrangement. Part of the strategy that I believe that we want to introduce, a digital strategy, would allow all residents to have the benefit of a permit of some sort or the other. And that's the way that we've been looking, and that's the way that we hope we can go along.
Thank you. It wasn't quite what I was more asking about care providers, carers who go around various houses to care for people, and then but have to pay their fee every time they arrive at somebody's house.
I can say that we've had a lot of debate on what designates a care provider, and does it involve anyone that works for the NHS, for instance. And that's something that I've passed on to the officers looking at the strategy. At the moment, we haven't forgotten it, and we'd like to do something for those care providers. But at the moment, it's not on our radar until we get the information through of how we're going with the actual strategy. Thank you.
Just before I come to Councillor Bayford, I think 151 has asked to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I think when we discussed this at the Fees and Charges Cabinet Advisory Group, there were a couple of different angles that were brought to us. I think Councillor Yates may have brought an angle forward in terms of the key workers issue. There's the first aspect of it. It's very difficult to define what a key worker is. If you recall, during the pandemic, even not to belittle the effort they made, but just giving you an example of the breadth, even supermarket workers were identified as key workers, for example. So we'd need to very carefully define what is inside or outside of that definition of a key worker. I appreciate for this, your question tonight, you've given the example of care workers. Then we also need to think about, are we talking about care workers where they're going out and doing their job? If they are doing their job, I'd expect a reasonable employer would be reimbursing those employees for their expenses. The same way they will for mileage, they should reimburse them for any parking costs they incurred. And as Councillor Saunders identified, even if you designate an area as available for key workers, it doesn't guarantee the space. It will be available when they arrive there. The other aspect of it is when we've been looking at, do we want to provide dedicated spaces for key workers who live in particular areas? And I think that's a more challenging thing to get to, and say, for example, nurses, when they return from a night shift late at night, have they got car parking space available to them when they return home? Again, just because you identify something as being a zoned and someone giving a permit, it doesn't guarantee the space. So it's something that can be looked at in the future as part of our parking strategy review, but at the moment it's not something that we could necessarily enforce with any meaningful impact as part of the fees and charges process.
Thank you,
As
Chris.
I say, Councillor Garmer, there's been a lot of discussion.
And there's more discussion because Councillor Bob Bayford would like to come in.
Yeah, not discussion, Leader. I mean, really just a comment. I mean, the fact is, as people are aware, I've been on this council quite some time, and probably every year parking is a major debate point. And I think, you know, parking issues are getting worse. There's no doubt about that. You know, everywhere you go, I mean, whether it's in Thanet, outside Thanet, parking is a problem. But I think one of the difficulties is that the parking problems are different in area to area. I mean, the problems in central Ramsgate are different to the ones in Kingsgate, but they're no less severe and no less, you know, sort of troublesome for residents and visitors alike. So what I was going to say is not very positive, but I mean, we're looking for this parking review, but unless it's really, really comprehensive, and it would need to be, I think wouldn't hold your breath for solutions to some of the problems that we've got being solved by parking charges alone.
Thank you. Well, I don't think it's any secret that I've always struggled with the thought that probably Thanet is the only coastal town in the whole country that actually doesn't charge to park on the coastal roads. But we have sort of 18 miles of it, but like it was pointed out earlier by Councillor Saunders and the 151 officer, is that on-street and off-street are two different things. So the only way, the true benefit, revenue benefit to the council is our off-street parking. And I'm very mindful and fearful that if we find a really good solution for our on-street parking, then Kent County Council could well be looking very closely at nicking it back from us. So I think we need to bear in mind, be careful what you wish for is probably something to actually mark there, because they're a council also struggling to balance the books, probably a hell of a lot more than we are. So the only thing I think we can be thankful for is that we're not a council that has totally thrown all of our revenue eggs in one basket with parking, because those councils that did do that during the COVID period really did suffer and struggle, and they'll probably take a lot longer coming out of that situation than we will. So I think we've been quite prudent really with our parking charges in comparison with other councils that might have depended much more heavily on their parking revenue. So it is difficult to balance, like the Cabinet Member for Finance has pointed out, and it's something that we probably always will struggle with, but a comprehensive review will hopefully point us in the right direction, and we can rely on the sciences as opposed to our own thoughts on it. So just to round up, I think I'm safe in doing it this time. It has been moved, and I would like a second. I think it was Councillor Jill Bayford is seconding. Do members agree? The next item on the agenda is, if I can turn over my page, item 6, which is the 2023-24 budget and 2023-27 medium-term financial plan. To introduce, no surprise here, will be Councillor David Saunders.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased to be able to present a balanced budget for 2023-24 to the Cabinet this evening. The budget setting process began in the summer of 2022, and Cabinet and officers have dedicated a tremendous amount of time and effort to get the position, or to get to the position that we are now in. My thanks go to all who have been involved and contributed to this process. I have to say that the financial team have worked very, very hard on this, and my thanks go to them for the support that they've given in all aspects as we've been working our way through the process. Despite what may seem like a lengthy and complicated process, this level of planning is critical in importance. It's how we continue to deliver the services that matter to people and protect and support our most vulnerable residents. This report sets out the Cabinet's recommendation to Council for next year's budget. We are recommending to increase our net spending on local services by £3.5 million or 19.6% for the budget year. This is a really significant increase. The District Council faces the same cost increases as everyone else on fuel, transport and pay, and this has to be funded. Inflation is a 40-year high, as no doubt I'll be reminded, and the current economic climate makes it difficult to protect the future, or predict the future and protect it. In addition to the increased cost of delivering services, the wider difficult economic climate means that demand for some key services, most notably temporary accommodation for homeless people, is rising. Providing a safety net for people who have nowhere to live is one of the most important things that we do, but it is a demand-driven and costs are rising. I'm also proud to be presenting a number of proposals to invest in some of the Council's key services which make a difference to our local people. With more spending on priorities such as improved CCTV, the recruitment of 5 coastal enforcement officers, and more money for seaweed collection and coastal cleansing. Despite the fact that inflation is running at around 10%, our core funding has only increased by 5.8%, whilst the Council is only allowed to increase council tax by a maximum of 3%. Therefore, we look to maximise our local income so that we can improve and provide quality services for our local people. We're doing this by maximising key income streams, by charging for services which are only used by a limited proportion of our residents. We're also planning to invest more in the council's property portfolio with the clear objective to increase revenue income. The council has a relatively substantial capital programme to deliver over the next 4 years through ongoing levelling up fund projects for both Margate and Ramsgate and the Margate Town deal. These funds provide the opportunity for significant investment in 2 of the district's towns, and the impacts on the budget are set out in the draft capital programmes for 23 to 27. Finally, the proposed increase in council tax at £7.42 per band D equivalent property represents an increase of less than 15 pence a week for each household. Leader, I move the recommendations within the report.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders, and I too would like to add our thanks to the hard work that has gone on into this from the finance team. It has been a lengthy and hard process, but I think it was absolutely well managed this year, and with a lot of contribution coming in from all angles. So if Chris Blundell would like to pass on our thanks to all of the team. To speak under 20.1, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you very much, Leader. Firstly, I would like to thank all of those involved in the production of the budget. The budget sessions especially were very useful and provided a very positive resource to all members. There is obviously something I very much welcome in this budget. Roughly a year ago, I said these words in this chamber. The Conservative budget proposes to use the £549,000 new homes bonus to pay off debt. The Labour Group proposes to amend this budget allocation. We propose to set aside the remainder of the new homes bonus to fund the provision of additional in-house temporary accommodation. I then followed this proposal with the following argument. Property values in Margate alone rose by 14.4% last year. They are predicted to rise to that level again over the coming year. Delaying purchases by 1 year increases the cost of purchase by an estimated 15% according to predictions, which means that delaying the purchase of property now costs us an additional £82,350 to buy equivalent property in a year's time. There is no debt that we could pay down now that is accruing interest at that level. The argument is not sound and is the opposite of fiscal responsibility. Politics does not have to be oppositional. We are at our weakest when it becomes so, because it blinds us to the potential in ideas and to the good in others. I put forward that argument to Cabinet, Overview and Scrutiny and Council, and my idea was still rejected, in spite of it being so fiscally sound. Since I made that argument, property inflation in Margate has increased by a further 10% to 24.5% in less than 2 years, and inflation has increased to 11%, an overall likely increase in purchase and development costs of 25.5% in the last year alone. I fought for months to push for the usage of last year's new homes bonus for further in-house temporary accommodation, because I knew that we would be facing extraordinary pressures in the coming year. And with an £800,000 growth in paying for private temporary accommodation, I believe I was more than right to do so. So reading this budget is bittersweet. I welcome wholeheartedly the usage of this year's new homes bonus towards further in-house temporary accommodation, and will support Councillor Jill Bayford and Cabinet in that in whatever way I can, because I believed it was necessary then, and I believe it is necessary now. But having had that idea turned down over and over again, to now see it brought forward in this year's budget, with the previous year's new homes bonus used to pay off a debt that cannot match the purchasing power lost, it is painful to see and acknowledge that the buying power that we had last year is now reduced by almost 26%. The potential loss of buying power due to property inflation that I predicted last year, if we didn't use the new homes bonus then, was £82,350. That predicted loss based on that sum is now closer to £139,995 due to inflation and further property increases. and we are a year behind where we could be in terms of creating the in-house temporary accommodation we desperately need to. This is the history of this proposal, but it has a far brighter future, and I know how well officers have planned and will continue to plan, and I fully welcome this usage of the new homes bonus. It is exactly how I would have used it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Saunders, would you like to respond? I don't think there was an actual question in there, but...
No, I don't think there's a question, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. As usual, you'd depress me with your figures, but be assured that we are aware of, and I've already mentioned it this evening, it's one of our priorities, and we are looking at plans. We do have plans. We can't actually go public with those plans at this point in time because there's commercial sensitivity, but be assured that we do have plans, and we will be bringing forward to this council recommendations with regards to increased availability for our residents and our homeless families, which is the homeless people that I want to concentrate most, and I know that Councillor Bayford is of the same opinion. But I thank you for your comments, as usual. Very well prepared, and yes, somewhat depressing, you're absolutely right, and no doubt the film that's now going on general release will bring even more inflation to the property prices in Margate, so something to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saunders.
Next speaker under 20.1, I have Councillor Everett.
Yes, thank you, Leader. It's a bit like wandering through the looking glass, isn't it? I mean, here we have a Conservative administration proposing an increase in the revenue spending budget of 19.6%. I'm not sure I ever expected to see that, really. Unfortunately, it's partly a product of inflation, which your government has allowed to run out of control. Not entirely through factors that it could determine, but certainly I don't think anybody could claim that over recent months it's managed the economy well. And of course the backdrop to our budget is always the position that we're put in by central government, and you can see even in the detail of this budget things like the fact we've lost £100,000 in terms of property searches because that's been taken away from us. They're constantly giving us a new series of challenges to deal with. I'm not going to reiterate what Councillor Whitehead said. I think we all know the ironies and the context of that discussion. There are some good things in this budget. I commend the officers who've worked hard on it. There are lots of areas on which we agree. There are always lots of areas on which we agree. Cross-party, all parties on this council. We tend to focus on the areas in which we disagree because those are the things that we have to debate in the chamber. And I will say some positive things about the budget when we get to council. I'd also like to make this offer. The Labour group doesn't support the 10% increase in parking charges. It doesn't believe it's about traffic management. It believes it's about funding the budget. We will engage constructively with any councillors, any members of this council and any political party in proposals to offset that charge in terms of this general fund budget, to remove the need to increase those parking charges by 10%. We'll engage with the Green Party, with Councillor Piper's party, we'll engage with your administration, and we'll also engage with your backbenchers, should they wish to have discussions with us, because some of them may have concerns about a 10% increase in parking charges. But we'll do so in a constructive way, and I'd like to think that working together, as we have throughout this council, we could reach some consensus outside of the need for performance in council meetings. But if we have to go to the council meeting and have the performance, then unfortunately we will do that. Thank you.
So I'm assuming from that what you're saying is that you're not going to agree to the 10%, so therefore vote the budget down. But in response to that, I would say that even in administration or in opposition, that if you take it away from one bit, you have to find it from another. So, you know, we're quite willing to listen. If you have areas where you think that we could claw back some percentage of the parking, but we have looked this over and over and over and through. And it's no surprise to you. I don't think it's any secret that I do have some red streaks in me somewhere. So there is a lot of emphasis on the housing, because I've made it clear all through our administration that's something that we do take very seriously. And it's really down to Councillor Saunders to know whether there's any wriggle room in any of it. We don't believe that there is a wriggle room, and obviously from the 151 officer we can hear as well, but we're quite willing to listen if someone has found some obvious area where we can take it out of one bit and put it back into another. But I don't want to preempt Councillor Saunders' response, and I think the 151 officer would like to also come in on this. So Councillor Saunders.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Everett. I don't quite know what your comment about the red streak is concerned. Certain members of this council know that I always wear red socks and probably got red underwear on at the moment, but there we are. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Leader. If we take the money away from one area, then we need to find it elsewhere, and quite happy to have debate on that subject. We have looked at it, and I will ask the 151 officer to make comment to see exactly if he spotted anything that the Cabinet Advisory Group didn't pick up on, and if he can see any, as you said, Leader, wriggle room. I don't like the word wriggle room, but if we've got some wriggle room there, yes, happy to find it and happy to adjust as necessary. But Chris, if you could comment, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to sort of clarify the financial impacts of freezing car parking charges, although as sort of set out in my previous contribution, it's more around managing traffic. That's always got to be our primary concern. Although we're only showing a £95,000 increase in income from car parking next year, that's because it's partly offsetting a £200,000 shortfall in the current financial year. So the size of the financial problem of doing that is actually close to the 300,000. So as the Leader rightly said, in order to balance the budgets, if there is a proposal to freeze council car parking charges or go at a lower level, you're looking to find reductions in expenditure or savings in the region of £300,000. Lots of the expenditure that's in the budget is non-negotiable. Stuff around temporary accommodation spending, for example, £800,000. There's no room to manoeuvre on that. There's no room to manoeuvre around items such as net cost of borrowing. You really will be looking at taking out some of the items that are in the budget that are around the priorities in terms of improvements and services that we want to deliver for our residents. So it's a very difficult situation if you want to do that, but it certainly is obviously a political decision setting the budget and something that can be done, but it's certainly not an easy exercise to undertake. As Councillor Saunders has said and Councillor Ashby, the Leader, said, it's a very long budget setting process. We've gone through this in a lot of detail. There obviously still is time before the budget is set, before in February, but we'd need to come up with something that's robust and deliverable to do that in order to sign the budget setting process off in full.
Thank you, 151. Next to speak under 20.1 is Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Leader. As this item specifically is about the 23 to 24 budget, I'm just going to focus on this item. I think we've made our point clear on parking. So in general, Labour welcomes this 23-24 budget and the mid-term financial plan. Again, we'd like to thank all the officers involved. The report mentions 19 budget prioritisation meetings, and I believe that was done over a 2-week period. So thank you for the hard work involved. From our estimates, we believe this budget addresses an important point, which is that TDC needs more resources in order to serve our residents. It is positive, therefore, that we are planning to use the Property Repair and Maintenance Reserve. I'm confident that members across the room will have ideas on how this could be spent. One item that jumps out at me is the one functioning boiler in Winter Gardens, which is keeping the venue free from damp and mould. And this could be used, as Councillor Saunders has said, in ensuring revenue in the future when it does reopen. But I do digress slightly there. The additional CCTV operatives is one we fully support and aligns with our resident survey, where 51% of residents say their top priority in making Thanet a good place to live was feeling safe. So we do support that. The addition of a new climate change coordinator is excellent and one we fully support given our carbon neutral target by 2030. An additional economic development officer role is to be welcomed, given that the council has to administer over £50 million over the coming years. We welcome the investment into our future vehicle and equipment replacement programme, and it's great to see the council confirm the plan to electrify the refuse vehicles by 2030. As Councillor Whitehead has so eloquently highlighted, we do welcome the £2.2 million being put into capital programme for the further provision of temporary homelessness. As you might expect, we will be making suggestions and amendments at the appropriate time following council protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates, and thank you for assuring myself and the Cabinet and the financial team that we've got some things right. And no doubt you and I will have discussions with regards to the other elements that you raised. Thank you.
Next to speak under 20.1 is Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Leader. I think we would echo a lot of what has been said. We welcome this budget broadly. We think there are some very good things in it. We're really pleased to see the building up of other income streams and the investment in infrastructure and property. We're pleased to note the building up of staff teams, particularly in areas where those additional members of staff could themselves be generating revenue to cover their own costs and more, economic development, regeneration, indeed climate change, where there are grants available that one solitary officer trying to do everything can't possibly be expected to manage. So we're very pleased to see all of those developments, and we're very grateful to the finance team and to Cabinet members for the time they've put into this, and to Chris and his team for all the information they've shared, the really helpful seminars, etc. It's been really useful. I think the main area that I wanted to ask about, and I'm sure I know what the answer is, but the digitisation of services obviously is the way that we're all going. But we are concerned the sorts of surveys that we've done with residents recently highlight this. We still have a high proportion of residents who are not comfortable with digitised services, who want to see a face-to-face service, who want to talk to a human being at the end of a phone line, etc. And we just want some reassurance that those kinds of services will continue to be provided for those residents, because otherwise we risk further excluding some of our most disadvantaged residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Be assured that we will not be overlooking our residents who are not totally savvy with digitalisation. And I was pleased personally to read in the newspaper today that cash is making a comeback, because I'm of a maturity that believes that cash is sometimes more important in looking after your own personal budget than using cards. But yeah, all your points are taken on board, and thank you for the comments. Thank you.
So this has been moved by Councillor Saunders. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Jill Bayford. Do members agree? Agree. So moving on to item 7, HRA budget, to introduce Councillor David Saunders.
Thank you, Leader. Next year's HRA budget is underpinned by a 7% increase in rents, which is in line with the maximum cap set nationally by government. This equates to an average rental increase of £6.20 per week for our tenants, the majority of which will be covered by increased housing benefit or universal credit payments to our tenants. And I understand that approximately 75% of our tenants are in receipt of said benefits. The HRA has been running at a deficit for a number of years, partly due to the imposition of statutory rental reductions and then caps being placed on rent increases in recent years. The deficit has been put under further strain this year due to the high inflation environment and the consequent increase in the council's costs. As such, this level of proposed rent increases is needed to continue to drive the HRA to a balanced and sustainable financial position, and also to finance our ambitious affordable house building programme and housing investment plan. Leader, I move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. To speak under 20.1, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Saunders. I would firstly like to thank everyone involved in HRA planning, management and decisions for the future year. I know from experience that it's not an easy task, and I acknowledge that fully. Holding the housing portfolio frequently means facing extremely difficult decisions in terms of balancing short and long-term need, and planning the future of the HRA and our current stock and the stock we need to build often falls into the realms of the most difficult planning and policy choices. When we look at rent increases, in this case a 7% increase, this is especially true. To give context, before 2020, rent increases had been frozen by central government for all councils. This, to a large degree, removed the ability to counteract increases in the cost of housing provision, which both reduced the ability to maintain council stock and forced residents into the private sector, where rents are far higher and tenancies less secure. It may have been intended as a way of reducing council housing lists and demand for council properties, to reduce state involvement in housing overall. But as all of us who live here know, shorter and less secure tenancies and higher rents do not decrease housing lists. They increase them. Which means that we have an ever-growing list of residents who should be in council housing, but are instead often facing removing themselves from the housing list and moving to private accommodation, which is far less affordable and not, I believe, what we as a country or as an area should be working towards. Those who are vulnerable should be provided for. Those who need secure housing should be housed. Managing that in the current national climate is difficult and requires complex decisions. I know this because I was faced with the need to increase rents to both maintain and grow our property portfolio in 2020. At that point, at an average increase of 83 pence per week. I struggled with that decision and took active measures to mitigate against it, because even though we know that these pressures are caused by a lack of funding at a central level, we have to take as many steps as possible to minimise the stresses caused by those central decisions. In spite of that deliberate mitigation, which effectively protected those whose increases weren't covered by benefits, the 83 pence increase that was necessitated wholly by central government failings was not supported by the Conservative group, and I faced unnecessary political point scoring for simply addressing the realities of the situation. As I have said many times in this chamber, deliberately oppositional politics often does not reflect the realities that we are all aware of. Bearing in mind that an 83% increase was not supported, we are now being asked to approve an increase of £6.20 per week, or £322.40 per year, at a far more challenging time, when inflation and bills have combined to place extraordinary pressures on individuals. The decision was difficult enough when it was 83 pence per week. A 7% increase at a far more financially challenging time has to be addressed even more carefully. For those tenants whose rent is covered under LHA, this is potentially less of an issue, as the funding will come directly from central government in the form of universal credit or housing benefit. But our demographics show that for those on affordable rent, who are often having to work several jobs or on very low incomes, this could have a significant impact at a very difficult time. I worried about those tenants significantly 3 years ago, and as such put in place a freeze on affordable rents. Removing those on affordable rents from the increase removed the burden on those tenants whose rent was not potentially covered by central benefits. We are asked to note that roughly 3/4 or 75% of our tenants are accessing housing benefit or universal credit, which in most cases can reduce the impact of this rise. But conversely, that means that 25% of our tenants, or 1 in 4, will be affected by it. Considering the scale of this increase, I ask Cabinet to consider adopting the same measure that I did in 2020 to support those tenants who are not able to access benefits, as although I fully accept that the pressures central government place on us to both maintain and create housing stock are unsustainable, I believe that we also have to consider what we can do to mitigate those pressures. And I genuinely believe that considering the needs of the 1 in 4 tenants who will be affected by this is essential to safeguard them and remove hardship. Thank you.
Councillor Saunders, no doubt you'll have to probably take answers from both. We've got both officers here, the 151 and the Housing Director. So.
I will indeed. I'd just like to thank Councillor Whitehead for her comments and once again for the comprehensive figures that she's produced. And I will go onto YouTube and study it again just to make sure that I've got it in my own head. But yes, it's difficult decisions that we've had to make, I'm afraid, and all credit to the officers sitting behind who I believe may have something to contribute to the debate, if I can ask Bob Porter perhaps, and also the 151 officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Well, I think a couple of key points, really. The first one is that central government ran consultation about rent increases this year, mindful of the high inflation position, and consulted on a range of options about what that level should be and whether there should be a cap on rent increases for social housing tenants. And that work concluded that a cap of 7% would apply across the sector, and obviously that's informed the recommendations within this report. I think the second key point is that the housing revenue account is running in deficit. It's been running in deficit for a number of years, directly, as the question indicates, as a result of the 4 years of rent reductions between 2016 and 2020, and that position is not sustainable in the long term. We are required to maintain minimum balances in the housing revenue account in the guidance and in legislation, and we are, and that includes the ongoing maintenance of all of our housing stock, as well as our new build programme. And we do have some significant programmes of investment and work coming up in our existing stock, and obviously commitments to continue with new build. So clearly, as Councillor White indicates, it's a difficult decision, but ultimately, without a balanced, in long-term balanced and sustainable housing revenue account, we can't deliver that investment.
Thank you. If I can come in after Mr. Porter there. Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Porter's covered off many of the points I was going to make. The other issue I wanted to draw out was around the freezing of affordable rents. Many of our tenants within the affordable stock will also be in receipt of universal credit or housing benefit as well, even though it's at a higher rate. What we do in order to protect those is make sure that we cap our affordable rates at the higher of the LHA rate or 80% of the private sector market rate. I believe those are the right figures. Ms. Porter, correct me if I'm wrong. When we've been looking at the rental increases, that actually meant there would have been, if we applied 10% broadly across all the affordable homes, there would have been 10 properties that would have gone above the LHA rate. In that case, what we've actually done is capped those so that they don't go above it. So those properties will actually see a lower increase, lower than 7% increase, so that those tenants that are still in affordable homes that are in receipt of benefit will still only pay at the LHA rate. So they should be protected to a greater extent than they would be without those measures in place. But as Mr. Porter said, I think as 151, the fundamental thing for me, it's important that we get the HRA out of deficit. it is running at a deficit. It's important that we get rents back up to recover the 4 years of cumulative rent reduction. So there was a 4% reduction over those 4 years when inflation was actually going up, which left quite a big real terms funding gap between 2016 and 2020. We're still looking to recover that lost ground. If we don't, you'll see from the charts that are presented in the report, it leaves us in a real position of our actual balances dipping below that minimum level and jeopardising the investment that we need to make in our housing stock.
Thank you, Chris, and Bob for your infill as well. And I think it's good to explain that the overlying methodology in the Cabinet's mind behind this budget is to make a secure future for this council, which is to grow on the air, or to concentrate on the areas that we know that we need to build for the future. I mean, this is definitely a budget that is building for the future, and always in these circumstances, I think we've come a long way from probably the previous years of budget setting, and this was considered to be the right move forward to put us in a good position going forward. This isn't just to get over this 12 months, it is actually trying to put not only the HRA in a position where we can grow the stock, but also the overall structure for the council itself, so that we can actually have a sound footing for the future. But I agree with Councillor Whitehead that, you know, our own housing stock is so important. It's not just to this council, it is to the whole of the country. The only way this country is going to get out of its housing situation is for councils to heavily invest in their own stock. It's the only way forward. And that's not the socialist in me, that is just pure economic sense, that councils can borrow money cheaper than anywhere else, and if we build our own stock, then we don't have to answer to shareholders to make profits. We can actually build it, and for a lot less than what is expected of developers to actually produce their builds for. So it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned. The problems we have in this area is our land, lack of land. But if all the Kent leaders do express the same things, it's regardless of whether they're a Labour administration, Liberal or Conservative or whatever, we all are coming from the same mindset. So I think the harder we push on that, but it is important that we get our own house or our own HRA in order, and I think this is the right way forward. Yes, it is hard, but it's going to be hard for everybody. You know, private rents, mortgages, I think mine's gone up quite considerably as well, like everybody else. So, but we just got to hope that it is the right step forward for the future. So that's the thinking behind the whole budget process, really, is to try and build great foundation for this council to go forward. So I believe you moved this item. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pugh is seconding. Do members agree? Right. Last but not least, the exciting item 8, which is Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy 23-24. Over to you, Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Leader, and the shortest of my intros. This report is required in accordance with the CIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management. It covers our capital spending and financing plans and its Treasury strategy, backed by prudential indicators and limits. The report also presents for approval the Council's minimum revenue provision policy, capital strategy, investment strategy and non-treasury investments report for the next financial year. A draft copy of this report was considered by the Governance and Audit Committee on the 30th of November 2022. Leader, I move the Cabinet approves the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. I always feel sorry for this item because nobody ever wants to speak under 20.1. You sure that no one can just muster something up to say about it? Either the report is so comprehensive and so well explained that nobody wants to question it. So congratulations to the 151 for that. So it has been moved and no speakers, and I'll have a seconder. Councillor Carp has joined in. So, do members agree? Thank you, members. Well, that concludes the business for this evening, and thank you very much, Councillor Saunders. You've definitely earned your corn this evening. So,
thank you very much.
And for all
I'm
your
not.
efforts
I'm
on
not
this.
going to sing an encore. I'm just looking at the pretty free-coloured pie chart that we have in that last item, and that's probably the reason we've got no comments.
Yeah,
It's
it dazzled
so
everybody.
nice. It's dazzled
It
everyone.
absolutely,
Thank you.
dazzled the hell out of everybody. So I declare the meeting closed at